everybody, and welcome back to a brand new edition of KerVAM, a Doctor Who podcast where generally we focus on all things DVDs and Blu-rays and the special features of Doctor Who. And that's certainly something we're going to be going deep into today, looking at the Doctor Who Season 7 Blu-ray, the Collection Blu-ray range. Season I feel like I've been looking forward to probably the most of all 26 seasons, given that I'd say Season 7 is my favourite. So it's going to be really fun to tackle lots of the new documentaries and special features that have been on the release, as well as just some of our thoughts on the stories in general. But first, I feel like we should quickly discuss the Season 2 trailer. I'm joined by Charlie, Bill and Ryan as always. So Charlie, Season 2, the trailer, any feeling, any hype?
A little bit more than I was before. Obviously, we had a bit of a discussion about how we're kind of not excited for season 2 in the last episode of this podcast. Yeah. But it's kind of rekindled my excitement somewhat. I'm still not like crazy hype for it. But I mean, we're recording this on the 12th, so we have exactly a month before it releases, which is quite nice. We have 31 days before season 2 or series 15, whatever, which is nice. I think the trailer itself looks pretty good, to be honest. It's hard to be excited after Empire of Death, which kind of crushed everyone's spirits a bit about this era. But looking back at season 1 and the middle section of it, it's really not that bad, and it'll be nice to see hopefully a few very good episodes by Russell and some other people this time, which kind of we didn't really get in season 1. But yeah, I mean, we have a shot which I mean is worth discussing, which is looks like Skaro. We've mentioned it might not be, and it might be Russell just trolling us for the sake of it.
Let's be real, probably.
But I'm definitely more excited than I was before the trailer. So there's that. And I'm sure we'll have 8 episodes of this discussing each one as it comes out, just like we did this time last year. And I think it's just nice that we've actually got Doctor Who this year. And I mean, 13 episodes of it, really. Yeah. With the spin-off later this year, which,
that's true.
You know, given how many episodes we had in like 2021 to 2023, it's nice to just have consistent seasons of Doctor Who coming out, even if we might not have one next year.
Yeah, so, I think we need to make the most of it this year is probably the way to describe it. But yeah, no, it's a very good point.
Exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Ryan, I feel like you've been not really feeling it about season 2 up until now. Did that trailer change your mind at all?
It looked cool, I guess. It looked visually stunning, but honestly, I still feel the same. Honestly, I'll grant it does look visually impressive, and I am intrigued by that episode with the cartoon character Mr. Ring-a-Ding, I think he's now called, voiced by Alan Cumming, who was of course in a Jodie Whittaker episode once before. And so I am looking forward to that and seeing the Doctor and Belinda in a cartoon world, as it seems like it's going to happen. That's got me really interested. I'm very curious to know how they're going to pull that off and to see what's going on there. But apart from that, my thoughts are pretty much still the same, to be honest. I'll watch it. It'll probably be entertaining.
Yeah.
But I'm still not going to feel the hype that I once had.
Yeah. No, that's fair enough. I can totally understand that. And Bill, are you feeling much excitement for season 2?
I would say, well, obviously the trailer itself was like pretty good. I think, you know, it's done a good job of like showing us what we can kind of expect from this season and everything. I think it is like anything. I think if you really enjoyed last season, then obviously you'll probably really love this season. But I think the majority of fans, especially like us lot, for example, are probably going to be at least extremely cautious going into this, thinking like, well, you know, if it turns out to be as good as last season in terms of like on an episode by episode basis, like the majority of the episodes are pretty good, pretty solid, then I think it's done quite well with that. And then, you know, it doesn't matter what the finale does, like whether it's a satisfying conclusion to Mrs. Flood's arc or not. I mean, it probably won't be, but you know, if it is, then I'll be pleasantly surprised. And yeah, I would, as much as like I know I understand the reasoning for why we haven't had like Daleks and Cybermen come back for years. At the same time, I'm also kind of like, do you know what? It's been like a couple of years now. I don't think it's such a bad thing to at least have the Daleks in one episode, especially if
Yeah.
this is Shooty's last. Then it's kind of like,
Yeah.
maybe this would be like the only opportunity to really kind of give his Doctor that chance to go up against them, because he said in interviews, I think, how much he wants to do it. So
Yeah,
you just have to hope that at some point, if I would really prefer if this wasn't his last season and he did at least the standard 3 seasons. But honestly, it's so difficult to tell what is going to be the case at this point, like, because I feel like the show is still going to continue, obviously, even without Disney. But it's very much a case of, does Shooty want to wait another year to potentially film season 3? Because it looks like that's going to be what happens now. And, does he want to do that? Or does he want to go off and, quite understandably, do much bigger and better things? I mean, if I was in his position, I would certainly be at least contemplating that, because he's very much an upcoming actor, very much an upcoming star, and he's been in films recently. He's obviously recently returned to the theatre as well. He's got a bright future ahead of him, and I honestly wouldn't blame him, as much as like, it would be sad to see him go. I wouldn't blame him if he did decide, do you know what, 2 seasons is enough for me, and I don't want to wait like over a year to film a third.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. I think it's a weird time to be a Doctor Who fan at the moment, because it feels like there's this mixture of generally positivity, sort of optimism, excitement, and hoping that this season's going to be good, and the spin-off's going to be good and whatever, but also that feeling of a complete unknown of what the future looks like for Doctor Who. Like, it really could be anything from, oh, actually, season 2 was great, Disney have commissioned another season, off we go, to Disney pulled out, Shooty's left, we don't know when there'll be another season. Like, it's anywhere in that. So it's a weird time to be a Doctor Who fan, I think. But well, we'll leave it there for the current era discussion and wind our way back 55 years to talk about what I think, for at least 2 of us, is our favourite Classic Who season. I'm not sure about you, Bill and Ryan, but I know, Charlie, it's your favourite season of Classic Doctor Who. So season 7, why do you love it so much?
I mean, it's just the overall quality, really, is the bottom line. I don't think in all 25 episodes of the season there is a bad one. They're all generally very, very good. I think, obviously, Ambassadors of Death is your favourite Pertwee story, I believe.
I would say so, yeah. I would say so. I think it is. It's so good.
Yeah, Ambassadors of Death. It's up there for me, top 5, maybe even 3. Inferno, incredible. Spearhead from Space, I think, is a better pilot to Doctor Who than An Unearthly Child. I think it's just an amazing introduction to not only the season or the era, but just the decade in general. Just 70s Doctor Who. You can start watching from Spearhead from Space.
Yeah.
It's just in general, and then just watch all the way up to the current, like, present day, and it would just make perfect sense. It's obviously every episode of the War Games exists, but Spearhead from Space, starting with that, it's in colour, and all the episodes are there. It's just a very nice starting point.
Yeah.
And yeah, obviously the overall sort of, it's much different to the Troughton era. Not that the Troughton era itself is bad, because it's not at all. It's very good in my opinion, but it's just such a nice, refreshing breath of fresh air to see this sort of much darker, grittier feel that Doctor Who has. It's kind of like almost like a James Bond film, in like especially Ambassadors of Death and Inferno.
Oh yeah,
it's just got such a different feel to it, and I think it's just incredible. I think Inferno especially just captures this feel. It's kind of weird to think that Doctor Who, being a sci-fi show, took 7 seasons and over like 200 episodes to get to a pretty standard alternate universe concept. But it's executed very, very well, and I think it's a great story. And obviously we have great action work as well. I think possibly the best the show's ever had, really. We've got all the stunts from Havoc, that obviously
Yeah.
is mentioned a lot in this box set because they're a big deal in Ambassadors of Death and Inferno. I'm sure we'll get onto it with the John Levine in conversation discussion.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just a fantastic season. Obviously, we have John Pertwee, who, in my opinion, is the best Doctor. The Brigadier is amazing.
Yeah.
Liz is kind of a forgotten companion in the sense that she was only in basically 4 stories.
Yeah.
And just this one season, which is kind of rare for a Classic Who companion. But I think we can all agree she's a good companion.
Absolutely.
Just kind of forgotten in history, given she was in one season 55 years ago. But just the overall quality, I think I have to give the season 10 out of 10 is kind of impossible technically, but let's say 9.5.
Yeah.
Because I would say Silurians is an 8, Spearhead is a 9, and I'd give the other 2 a 10 out of 10. I would seriously say Frontier in Space is first for me in the Pertwee era, which we've had this conversation about. It's a strange one to put at first, but it is for me. I'd say second is Ambassadors of Death and third is Inferno.
Yeah.
Spearhead is definitely top 10 out of 24.
Yeah.
And I'd say Silurians isn't top 10, but definitely top 15, which isn't crazy out of 24, but I seriously don't think there is a single bad 25-minute episode in this whole season. It's just brilliant.
No, I agree. I agree all round. I was watching Spearhead from Space the other day, and I felt like of all of this, for me, of all the 4 stories, Spearhead was always the one where I was like, it's quite good, but I don't love it quite as much as all the others. But I watched it and I was just like, this is just great. I was almost only planning to watch, I think, the first episode or 2 when I sat down, and then I ended up just watching the whole thing because I was just like, it's really good. It really engaged me. It really kept me interested the whole way through. It's a great story, a great introduction for John's Doctor. I think, even that sort of story that I thought wasn't the best, I really thoroughly enjoyed as well. So yeah, I agree, Charlie. It's an all-round great season. Bill, where does season 7 sit for you?
I wouldn't say ultimate favorite, but it is up there, certainly in the upper kind of list, because I think for me, Spearhead and Inferno are probably the highlights of the season. Especially Inferno, I think that's the one I probably love the most and one of my favourites ever of Doctor Who.
Yeah.
Silurians, I think, Silurians and Ambassadors really, they are good. I think the only thing that does it for me, particularly with some of Ambassadors anyway, is I feel like if you cut down a few episodes, it probably would be an even tighter script. But having said that, to be honest, there's far worse stories out there, and there's a lot of stories that are not even as long as Ambassadors that just do not work in the format that they've got. And Ambassadors, whilst it could really have been at least 4 or 5 parts instead of 7, it's still pretty solid overall, and kind of the whole concept behind it, the concepts behind all 4 stories are just great. And like Charlie said, it's just a lot more grown up, I think, than the 60s was. Not to say that was a bad thing with the 60s, the 60s had good moments as well, but I think it was a good idea for them to just shake things up as much as they did with season 7, just to kind of breathe so much more, so much new life into it, and to just kind of say, yes, we're still doing Doctor Who, but we want it to be very different. There's obviously that whole Quatermass connection that very much Derek Sherwin and stuff wants to go for, and the whole kind of Exile to Earth, obviously that throws a massive span in the works for the Doctor, because here's this character who's so used to having this freedom to go anywhere he wants, and then suddenly he's trapped on Earth in the 70s or 80s, whenever it's set, and he's just having to make do and try and experiment on his TARDIS to get out of there. And I think that it just opens a lot of potential, which I think John Pertwee does very well in kind of that, he's still going to help the Brigadier and unit out, because obviously he still wants to save the day, defeat the monsters and everything, but he's also gets very irritable. He gets very I wish I was anywhere but here, basically, sometimes. And I just love the whole dynamic that he has with the Brigadier. I love the dynamic he has with Liz. I think yeah, it's a real shame we didn't get to see more of her, because I loved that whole fellow scientist like angle. I would have loved to have seen more of that. And yeah, it's just, yeah, it's maybe not my all-time favorite, but like it is definitely somewhere within top 10, certainly, like ever. So, and yeah, maybe I do have some issues with one or two like of the stories in terms of like pacing, but beyond that, it's a pretty solid season overall. Like,
Yeah.
there's still stuff to enjoy, even with the pacing, with ambassadors, with Silurians. There's still lots of stuff to enjoy, and there's still really good meaty ideas, I think, in all four stories. That is just, and yeah, I don't love it as much as you and Charlie do, but I still respect it, and I still respect its place in Doctor Who's overall history as well, because it's an important moment in it. And yeah, I would still rank it very highly.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree with you. And I think, you've hit on that kind of idea that each of the stories has a very strong story to it. It feels like, and because we haven't done 4 or 5 years of Earth-based Doctor Who, it feels like these stories, at least within Doctor Who, are kind of original. I feel like it was Terence Dicks who always used to joke about by the end of season 7, they'd already done all the Earth-based stories they could think of, and so you're just rehashing it for the next 3 seasons. So it feels like at this point it does feel so fresh and so new for the show, which I think just really works so strongly in its favour, sort of above everything else. So Ryan, where do you sit? Are you in with me and Charlie, or are you more in Bill's side?
I'm more near towards where you and Charlie are. It's not my absolute favourite Pertwee season, but I think season 8 is still my favourite Pertwee season. Because for me, season 8, that felt like the Pertwee era, perfectly refined, with the unit family all together, Joe Grant, John Pertwee on top form, and of course Roger Delgado's master.
Yeah.
And the season 8 has more of a, I feel a bit more connected to season 8, and that was what definitely made me absolutely love John Pertwee's third Doctor, who is, fittingly enough, my third favourite Doctor ever. I just think John Pertwee is obviously one of my gold standard favourite Doctors of all time. So yeah, even though season 8 is my number 1, season 7 is very, very close. It's a very close number 2. If I was ranking the Pertwee seasons, it's a very close second place. If it wasn't for season 8, this would have been my number 1. I just agree with Eddie. It is a very solidly constructed season of the show, and it's kind of it does feel like the perfect fruition of what Derek Sherwin wanted to do with them, because he said that he had enough of outer space stories, and he felt like people had enough of that, so he wanted to bring it all back down to Earth and make it feel like, as I say, Quatermass, and to get it feel more grounded and scary again. And I think they did a good job of that in these 4 stories, and I think they're practically nearly flawless. I think they're pretty. If I was to rank all the John Pertwee stories, I think these 4, well, maybe 3, would be in my top 15 favorite John Pertwee stories. I think they're all really good. I mean, I would give Spearhead from Space and the Silurians both a 9 out of 10, and Ambassadors of Death and Inferno a 10. I think
yeah, exactly.
It's incredible. And you mentioned, I think Spearhead from Space, ironically, that was the very first John Pertwee story I've ever watched out of any third one. So that was the first one. And yeah, you're absolutely right. It does feel like a good introduction to the show. That, and I'm also mentioning this with Ark in Space as well. It's like with that story as well, you could watch these stories without having had any knowledge of Doctor Who whatsoever, go in and you could just enjoy it from there, and you feel like you wouldn't miss a thing, honestly. And it's such, I'm just so incredibly bowled over how much they managed to accomplish in just only 4 stories, and it really is amazing. And just seeing John Pertwee just kind of leave the Doctor out of his element, basically, just having been stranded on Earth and having to do the best of what he can in these current circumstances, not having any time travel whatsoever, and just seeing how he's able to accommodate in the environment he's placed in and having to work with the Brigadier and Liz Shaw. I think incredible partnerships. Of course, Jo Grant will always be my favourite companion. She'll always be my number one. I just love Jo. But Liz Shaw was a good, solid companion for John Pertwee's Doctor. I think they had a really good. It's almost kind of similar how I feel about the Tom Baker and Romana in some ways. It feels like they're very equally matched with each other, which I think is a very good dynamic. And it's a shame it didn't last more than that. But for what we had, I think Carol and John did an amazing job with Liz Shaw, and obviously the Brigadier. He's just absolutely amazing. Just seeing how that relationship with the Doctor, even though it was, you can see him and Troughton were definitely getting along well. Troughton's Doctor, they were kind of, they knew where each one was coming at. With Pertwee's Doctor, the Brigadier, there was definitely some friction there in some of those stories. You can tell they didn't completely gel. I think it's partly because of the Doctor's current situations and also because of the events of the stories that happened to Silurians, what happens at the end there, and the Brigadier not knowing if he is really the Doctor that he's familiar with or not, if he's an imposter. It creates a good, interesting dynamic there between the two of them that I found extremely fascinating to watch. So, yeah, it is just an incredible season of the show. Even though, as I said, even though season 8 will always be my favourite Pertwee season, this is a very close second and definitely one of the seasons of classic Doctor Who overall, period.
Yeah. I certainly agree with you. And yeah, it's the whole Pertwee era. I love it. It's such a great time for the show, I think. So it's certainly something that I'm happy we're finally got 4 of the 5 seasons released and are able to talk about this one today. So we're going to delve in as we do to some of the special features, particularly the new features to this box set, because of course all of these stories have been released before. I mean, Spear from Space has been released like 3 times before already. So there's so many different features for that one. But some of the new ones I want to dive into. The first one is the Looking for Mac documentary, which is all about Malcolm Hulke, where the writer of a number of Doctor Who stories, but a particular number in the John Pertwee era, including Doctor Who and the Silurians and the Ambassadors of Death from this season itself. He, of course, died in 1979, and we didn't really know very much about him. And there was, as they joke in the documentary, that one picture of him until this documentary, it was always the same picture we saw of him. So, Charlie, what did you make of this documentary and sort of learning a bit more about who Malcolm Hulke was and the way his life sort of played out, really?
I think it's very good that they're doing these kind of documentaries.
Yeah.
It's obviously a Toby Haydock one, which I mean he's great at Doctor Who documentaries, up there with Matthew Sweet. He's really good at these. I just think it's very nice we're getting these documentaries of kind of forgotten people in Doctor Who's history. He's obviously in the context of season 7, he's the guy who did Doctor Who and the Silurians. I think he's got he did some work on Ambassadors of Death as well, but it's not credited, sadly, because there were like 6 writers on that story. For some reason.
To be fair, there was.
Right. There were loads of them, but if you look up his credits, it does come up with Ambassadors of Death as well. And I think he did Colony in Space, Frontier in Space, which is obviously my favorite Pertwee story, which is pretty nice.
Yeah,
and Invasion of the Dinosaurs and the Sea Devils, which is a pretty good run, really.
The
Colony in Space
as well. He also wrote War Games, which I think is best 60s stories. He's an incredible writer. Yeah,
absolutely.
Of course,
absolutely. I agree.
The War Games. I can't believe I didn't think about the War Games. But just in the context of Pertwee, of course, it's incredible record, really. But obviously passing away in 79, he never, we don't really know anything about him, or we didn't until now. As an actual documentary, I think it was somewhat one of the weaker features on this box set, kind of by default. Not in the sense that it was bad. It was quite interesting, but it just sort of gets overshadowed for me by a couple of the others, which we'll get into in a bit. But it was very interesting. It sort of dives into his politics quite a lot. Being a member of the British Communist Party, we have the whole the sequence in the where he's going through all the records, and it's really quite interesting. But it sort of explains why he did the stories he did, which are quite kind of very gritty political stories, and it's very different to what Doctor Who sort of was and is now. Really, it sort of explains this writer who is very sort of shrouded in ambiguity before, and brings light to him, which I think is really quite nice, because since we're getting all of these documentaries, especially now we're getting ones, these future collection box sets, lots of them will be the 60s seasons. We'll probably get lots of documentaries about these sorts of forgotten people in Doctor Who's history, which is really quite nice. I think it's definitely a very good feature, and yeah, I'm glad we have it. It's good.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I absolutely agree. I mean, I think one of the best moments in that was probably when they played in that little bit of audio from that interview they'd done that had been done, in 90, like a couple of months before he died or something, that, we'd never heard what he sounded like before, or kind of, the way he kind of got things across or anything like that. So I felt that was such a great insight that, they discover by doing features like this to be able to actually hear from the person himself and his, kind of sad perspective, really, to an extent. The fact he was never really offered an opportunity again on Doctor Who after doing Invasion of the Dinosaurs. He was just kind of forgotten about, really, at that point. I thought that was, quite really quite interesting to learn. So, Bill, what did you take from this documentary?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a difficult one, because I think with these figures, like the forgotten figures, obviously, like if there's a paper trail and breadcrumbs and stuff that they can follow along, then it can be quite enriching and quite informative. I felt like with this Malcolm Hulke one, whilst there was still like enough stuff to get an idea of who he was and kind of like his life and everything, I feel like by the end of it I was still left with a few, I think, questions about him. And I think that's partly because I think he's a figure from the show's history that maybe there's less breadcrumbs about, and but yeah, we still got like a much better understanding of who he was as a person, what his life was like, and all that kind of stuff, and like his political leanings and his whole kind of when he was being monitored by the secret services as well. That was quite like a crazy moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not every day you see that in a Doctor Who documentary.
Absolutely.
It was just really interesting because like, yes, he's still somewhat of a shadowy figure, I think we're never gonna know the full story about, unfortunately. But I do feel like this documentary did what it could with all the paperwork they could find and all the people they could interview, and to tell like as complete a picture of him as a person as they could. And I think they did a pretty good job with that. And I think that whole interview with him, again, like you say, we had no idea what he sounded like before and what his voice was like. We had no idea, kind of, because I don't think he did many interviews like genuinely. So we had no idea beforehand what his actual thoughts were on the show. Now we know that he was very much of the persuasion of all Doctor Who is political. And that's something that I agree with, but like I know that's something that can rile up some people.
Yeah, to play that out for people nowadays, all the Doctor Who's gone woke people.
Exactly. Like it's I think he's such a fascinating person. It's a shame we couldn't, I think, fill in all the dots, but I think the dots that were filled in it was really satisfactory to get kind of a much more complete picture than we had, because as you say, it was literally just before, and it was one or two pictures of him and a Wikipedia article, and that was basically it. We had no kind of concept of who he was. We didn't realize, I think, like, we knew how close he was with Terrance Dicks, but I don't think we quite realized to what kind of extent, with that bit where he writes a letter detailing like upper class etiquette that Terrance Dicks has to follow or something. It's really random, but it kind of paints a picture of how close they were, I think, and how, it was, because of Malcolm Hulke that Terrance Dicks became the writer he did and became the script editor that he did and contributed, so much to Doctor Who's history. And Malcolm Hulke, obviously also has a huge part to contribute with the Silurians and Sea Devils and just all of his stories. Even some of the less talked about ones, like his first one was technically the faceless ones, but
Yeah.
it doesn't really get talked about much in compared to like Silurian, Sea Devils, War Games, etc. But yeah, it was still just he was a really fascinating, I think, person, and I think whilst we can never like fully grasp how fascinating of a person he was, what we could find out, I think, was really intriguing. And yeah, just hats off again to Toby Haydock and all the team for putting out another brilliant documentary like this.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I 100% agree. I feel like we've pretty much covered all there is to say. But right, have you got anything else to add, Ryan, on the documentary? I feel like we've pretty much covered it. But
I think pretty much summed it up perfectly. It was definitely an interesting documentary. Of course, I was fascinated with Matt Culp because he wrote some fantastic stories like the War Games. He co-wrote that with Terrence Dicks, and that is still my favorite 60s stories ever, frankly. And yeah, it was interesting hearing sort of all different perspectives, like how close he was with Terrence and how he was a mentor to Terrence before, and so funny that when Terrence became script editor, he had to basically became Malcolm's boss, basically, and just hearing how well they complemented each other was just very fascinating to hear, and just like how, despite the fact that he was part of the Communist Party and Terrence was a socialist, they still got along. It never got in the way. They were still like had a really good working relationship, and yeah, it was really interesting to hear, and also get that bit of audio at the end that the fan, I believe his name was Gary Hopkins, I think he was, and how he managed to get, I think it was about 13 weeks before he passed away, and how he managed to into it. And I think you could hear a little bit of regret that he was never asked to come back and write any more Doctor Who's. I mean, it would have been great to see him how he would write Tom Baker's Doctor, how he would have been able to handle that. That would have been brilliant to see, but unfortunately it didn't happen. And it is a shame we don't find out more about him, but I think there was very little as it is, that I think they pretty much did the absolute best of what they can. And once again, Toby Haydock knows how to present a documentary, so
absolutely,
yeah, definitely worth a watch.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I think as I think Charlie, you said, it's maybe not my all-time favourite looking for documentary. There's obviously been quite a few of these now. I feel like this isn't maybe the absolute best one, but maybe that's just because there wasn't that much we could find out about Matt Culp. I think that's probably the key thing, but they still did a very good job, as you say, Ryan. I think it's definitely worth a watch. Now, the next feature's probably my kind of less favourite one of the lot, is the Terror of the Suburbs documentary, which kind of focused on, I guess, how Doctor Who and TV fits into suburban life and the portrayal of suburban life on television. And it felt like one of those documentaries where it has to be about Doctor Who, but also it kind of, half of it isn't really about Doctor Who, and it sort of starts having quite tenuous links. And we kind of get to the point where we're basically just interviewing an MP who happens to be a Doctor Who fan for about 10 minutes, which was slightly interesting. So, Bill, I don't know, what did you make of this documentary?
Yeah, I think it was good. I enjoyed it. I think it's like that and the science one, the Lucky 13. I think, and I mean this in the nicest way possible, I think they were kind of scraping the barrel with both of them, trying to think of, I mean, it's kind of an impossible situation with this season because unfortunately, so many of the people who worked on it, whether it be in front of or behind the camera, are unfortunately no longer with us. So they are quite limited in what they can really kind of create new special features about. So I don't blame them for kind of going for more obscure, like abstract kind of stuff in terms of talking about the science of it, or in this case, talking about Doctor Who's relation to the suburbs, which, as you say, is a very strenuous link. But it also, I think it's a nice enough kind of documentary, but it does kind of feel like, I don't know, I don't know if I'm wrong, but maybe in some ways it feels like something the DVD range would have done back in the day, because
this
it
is what I was
feels
thinking,
like something much more like really obscure part of Doctor Who's history.
Yes.
So, like a real niche within it. And you know, I mean, I enjoyed some of those DVD documentaries that were really niche, don't get me wrong, and I enjoyed this one, but yeah, I think it was still good. I mean, I think they were really trying to, as you say, tie it into Doctor Who, tie it into season 7. There was a lot of talk about the street scenes from Spearhead and everything, and which you know was kind of fascinating. But
no, I agree.
I feel like that could have almost been like a featurette of its own in a way. Like if that was just like a 5-minute discussion with Matthew Sweet and that location manager, I think that might have worked a bit better.
Yeah,
but yeah, it was, you know, it wasn't the worst kind of special feature like I think we've ever had. I think there's still lots to enjoy with it, but I don't think it was kind of the ultimate highlight of the set. I think that would probably be something else.
Yeah, I tend to agree, and I thinking about that sort of first bit where they go down the street from Spear from Space and all that, I was kind of expecting that was what the rest of the documentary was going to be, but we'd go to some of the other locations from the rest of the season. That really felt to me like where the story was going of this documentary, and then we sort of started talking to some random people that didn't really have anything to do with Doctor Who, and I don't know, it just felt like it went all a little bit awry at that point. Ryan, what did you think?
Yeah, I kind of feel exactly the same. Honestly, it's nice enough documentary. It's nice talking about how the normal suburban, how it can, you know, be contorted into something that could be horrific. This sort of, as I think he described it as this sort of this uncanny feel to it, and which is definitely interesting, and it's something that that was definitely insightful. But yeah, it's just, it felt like they were kind of stretching it on a little bit as it went on. It kind of was a nice discussion that could have been told for about half the length, honestly. But it did raise some interesting things, like how they were examining that road and saying that how the production, that location managers say that something like this they wouldn't think of doing of now. They were trying to cut corners, which I feel like was a bit of an interesting thing to say, because he said that there's just so much to organise, especially when it comes to a busy street, having to divert traffic, that it's not something they would try and do now. Which again is interesting how because I was thinking about how they would try to film it nowadays, especially when traffic is as busy as it is especially on London streets. And although it would be interesting to see how they would try to manage that even now, it's interesting. It did resonate thoughts. I thought it was an interesting question there, just to see.
Yeah, I agree.
Right now, whether or not it is even remotely possible as it was back then. So yeah, it was definitely insightful. Matthew Sweet, as I said, he knows how to string along as best he can. But I think just like the Lucky 13 documentary, which we'll get onto a bit, it does feel like it's only very tenuously related to Doctor Who at best. Although I would say this perhaps has a tiny bit more to Doctor than perhaps Lucky 13. I don't know. They just it felt a little bit.
Yeah.
It definitely felt like a typical sci-fi featurette that they just happened to lump it into a Doctor Who set.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Yeah, I think so. And well, let's kind of bring it also onto Lucky 13, as you say. It kind of sits with this documentary as well. I must confess, I really enjoyed the Lucky 13 documentary. I thought it was really good. I feel like the difference between the two is almost that Lucky 13's a bit more self-aware of the fact that it's not very much about Doctor Who, and kind of almost makes jokes about how tenuous the links are to some of the things in Doctor Who, which I think is the kind of right approach to make it kind of fun. And I think the guy sort of hosting it did really, really well as well. I thought it was, you know, just that drawing that line between sort of being a bit comedic and fun, but also being quite informative as well and appealing to Doctor Who fans. And I just think all the stuff like mixing in Apollo 13 and all some of this historic sort of Tomorrow's World stuff and all that kind of thing, I actually found that all really, really interesting and engaging. So I think for me, that as a documentary does work really well, even though it is quite tenuously linked to Doctor Who. So, Charlie, Terror of the Suburbs, Lucky 13, what's the better of the two for you?
Lucky 13.
Yeah.
Like you, I feel like I mean, you three have all covered it very well. It's kind of just sadly, like you were saying, Bill, the majority, I mean, basically literally every recurring character except Benton, the actor,
Yeah.
has sadly
Yeah.
passed away. So we have obviously the In Conversation with John Levine, which we'll get to, and we have obviously the Nicholas Courtney documentary.
Yeah.
But it's very, very difficult to make special features for a set like this. Because it's one of those where most people are sadly no longer with us. It's difficult. So you have to do these kind of documentaries where it's like, isn't it like 36 minutes or something? Terror of the Suburbs?
Yeah, something like that. And then I think Lucky 13 is
yeah.
nearly about 45 minutes.
Yeah. But Terror of the Suburbs is basically 36 minutes on a minute of Spearhead from Space was filmed on this road. And they've got to stretch it out to 36 times the length of the sequence, which, I mean, like we've said, is interesting. I think the stuff on the actual street and where they were sort of analysing the scene and seeing, obviously, we know that some shots were filmed. One of the shots of one of the women who the Autons attacked was filmed in the factory set.
Yeah, I like that.
That was quite interesting. And they filmed that days later, and it's fun to see, like, you know, the lists of all the extras in that scene. But after that, like you said, it just goes on a little bit, and I feel like it feels like this would have worked a lot better in like a 2008 DVD as like a 10-minute featurette, not an actual documentary on a 2025 Blu-ray set. But obviously, as you know, as I've said, it's very, very difficult to make special features for this season because we simply don't have enough people. But yeah, Lucky 13, I think I agree with you, Elliot. It's a lot more self-aware. It knows that it's kind of not Doctor Who, but at the same time, it's quite entertaining as its own thing. I don't think I'll be rushing to rewatch this one. When I go back and let's say I do a marathon and I watch all the Blu-ray sets once they're all released and I watch all the special features, I won't be rushing to watch this one. I don't think. No. I think I'll be watching maybe some Behind the Sofa, the In Conversation, and the Nicholas Courtney documentary, which obviously I feel like we're saving the best for last here.
Maybe.
Maybe.
Well, there's something we haven't mentioned yet, so you know.
That's true, actually. I didn't think about that. But
yes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing maths and physics at university, so I should find this interesting. Yeah, it's all right. I like how they include the Apollo stuff into it, and obviously they explain that the Ambassadors of Death kind of exists because Apollo 11 was, you know, very recently, and all the space race was kind of happening around this time. But I feel like that there's kind of a lot on the Cybermen here, which is fun. And this obviously goes into like Kit Pedler and all of that. Yeah. It's just very strange to have this on a Blu-ray season of a Doctor that doesn't have a Cyberman episode. It would have worked, I feel, a lot better on a season 3, 4, 5, or 6 box set. I feel like it's kind of, and it goes, you know, so much of it is about the 1960s and everything. It just feels very strange to have this on season 7 because it's, you know, obviously it's linked to Doctor Who is tenuous. It's linked to Ambassadors of Death is even more so. It's very kind of loosely connected.
You know, the Apollo mission was at the same time as the airing of Ambassadors, so and it's all space ships and that kind of thing. I think that's probably what they're trying to market it on. Plus, I guess they've got nothing else to say about Ambassadors of Death. So
exactly. I mean, it was nice to see. I believe it's Robin Ince who was the presenter of this. He's sort of a well-known scientist. He's written like books on physics and stuff. I recognized his name. And it's nice that they filmed it in the Leicester Space Centre. It's a cool little feature. I feel like you can kind of watch this with season 3, 4, 5, and 6, and it would make just as much sense.
Yeah.
Like, it's not very pertwee. To me, it's a very Troughton era special feature. Not that there's anything wrong with that. And obviously, we've not had a Troughton box set yet, so it's nice to have something like that. I'd say, yeah, it is better than Terror of the Suburbs, but none of them sort of stand out to me as the highlight of this box set. But they're not the worst either.
I do tend to agree. And while maybe they've got even better documentaries lined up for the Patrick Troughton box sets, and that's why it's ended up on this box set. Who knows? Bill, have you got anything else to add on Lucky 13?
Not much. I mean, the only other thing I can think of is I've actually been to National Space Centre
There
in
you go.
Leicester, so I knew that location very well.
Yeah.
And it was weird to see like a location I've been to on a Doctor Who Blu-ray. That still feels quite weird, but
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. Yeah, it was nice to kind of, as you say, just kind of get that sense of real life versus Doctor Who, kind of what it was tying into at the time with Apollo 13 and, you know, all that kind of potential disaster that nearly happened. And then the fact that was going on at the same time Ambassadors was airing. I mean, and kind of the similarities, I think, in terms of Ambassador's storyline to that. Again, it's quite kind of relevant, I think, to that time period where there was a lot of, you know, like the Apollo missions and the space race and everything. And yeah, it was Lucky 13, I would say. Yeah, it was the superior of the two between that and Terror of the Suburbs, because at least, even if its link to Doctor Who was extremely like strenuous at best, there's still a lot of like interesting historical and science stuff kind of going on that, you know, like they spent quite a lot of time on that presenter who used to do Tomorrow's World and stuff like that, and I didn't know much about him beforehand, so it was nice to kind of hear about you know, the stuff he did and how famous his presenting became. And it is a weird thing to include on a Doctor Who Blu-ray, but I think as a documentary as a whole, I think it's pretty good. I just think, it feels a bit out of place on a Doctor Who release. I think that's the only thing.
I agree.
I'll also I'll also do tend to agree. Of the two, I do think it's a good documentary. Maybe not a great Doctor Who documentary, but as a science documentary, I think it was really well done and very well put together. And listening to everything about Apollo 13 and everything, all I thought was, man, it makes me actually want to watch the Apollo 13 film, Ron Howard film again. It makes me want to watch it again because it's such a great film and how they managed to adapt Apollo 13 into that. It just watching the actual footage of it, it just kind of brought back a bit of memories. I was just like, man, I really need to rewatch that film again. It's been such a long time, and
now's the time.
Don't want to turn off on a whole Apollo 13 review here, but
absolutely,
But it is such a great film. If anyone hasn't seen it, I highly recommend it. It's such an amazing film.
Yeah. Well, there we go. That's your review. That's what you took from it, is watch Apollo 13 again. So there we go. Lucky 13. Interesting inclusion on a Doctor Who Blu-ray, but it was all right. It was okay. So let's start moving on to some of, well, I would say for me, the two highlights of the set, I would say, which are the In Conversation with John Levine, or John Woods, and the Nicholas Courtney tribute documentary. So we'll start off with John Levine. And I feel like these In Conversations, there's been a lot of them now. There must have been like nearly 20 because some of the box sets had multiple. I found this one of the more interesting ones, personally. I thought, I really think that John Levine's an unusual character. Let's say that much. Like, we've seen it before in like when he did a weekend with Toby Haydock. I can't remember what they called that one, but that living with Levine or something, I think it was, many years ago. He came across as a slightly, an unusual character in that. And I think in this, we kind of just pull back some of those layers to understand, his really difficult upbringing and the sort of just general challenges he's had throughout his life, which have affected the way, he is as a person. But then also just how, like, appreciative he is that he actually was in Doctor Who, and like talking about how much he loves the fans and all that kind of stuff. It felt sort of, a really interesting insight into his life, and a really sort of endearing for him, I think, when we haven't always seen that from John in different things. I don't know, Ryan, how did this strike you?
It kind of surprised me. I'll be honest, I haven't watched the previous one that he did with Toby Haydock, but watching this one, I was just kind of surprised about how very up and down his life was. The fact that he grew up with a father who despised it. It was just hearing some of the stories. It was very heartbreaking, honestly, just to hear everything that he's been through, the illnesses he's suffered from, and just hearing that despite everything he's been through, he's still managed to kind of pull through it and move ahead and just never let any of that drag him down. And just hearing how he grateful he is for Doctor Who and how much of always felt like a really nice comfort blanket for him, just being with everyone, and how grateful he is, especially to director Douglas Camfield for giving him a chance to be in Doctor Who. And yeah, just hearing just how so you could tell that it meant a lot to him. You could tell that after everything he'd been through and all the difficulties he faced, he's still internally grateful to the friends he had, especially to John Pertwee, who he felt like he shared a lot in common with, because apparently John Pertwee also had a father that he despised and also had like a difficult upbringing as well, and you can tell that he just had the best time of his life when he came to Doctor Who, and just being surrounded by it was like the family that he always wanted. Basically, it was the family that he wanted to be around, and you can tell it was a little bit sad that he knew it was coming, but he was also still a bit sad that it all kind of dissipated as the John Pertwee era went on, and especially by the time when Tom Baker came along, it was practically almost gone. And yeah, it was definitely one of the most fascinating, definitely of all the in conversations, it's definitely one of the better ones. And I will admit, going into it, I thought I was thinking, like, is this going to be one of the better ones? Because I was thinking, is there going to be much there? But surprisingly, it really caught me off guard. I was really surprised just hearing, as I said, just all the trials and tribulations that John Levine had to face in his life and from such a young age. And it was just kind of inspiring to kind of hear how he never let any of that drag him down, and he was able to come out of it on the other side for the better.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's clearly, as you say, just very appreciative of having the opportunity to be in the show and be remembered, I suppose. Charlie, how did John Levine strike you in this documentary?
I think it was a great documentary. Really, really brilliant. I think it was definitely, I think for me, the highlight of the set.
Mm-hmm.
I think, like you said, we must have had 20 of these documentaries now. I mean, we've had 17 box sets, something like that.
So, yeah, I think so.
It's been quite a few now, with sort of 2/3 of the way through classic Doctor Who, which is pretty awesome, really.
Yeah.
Mostly because we're closer to New Who, and that Christopher Eccleston documentary we want so badly.
Please.
Yeah. Yeah, we're not going to stop talking about that until it happens, really.
And in conversation with Christopher Eccleston, please.
2 hours long, and it just
spill the tea. Yeah.
Yeah, but this one was absolutely brilliant. I think the Colin Baker one was the one I'd consider my favourite from the season 22 box set that was released a couple of years ago. 3 years ago now, really. It was 2022, wasn't it?
Time flies.
Yeah, but this might be a contender for one of my favourites. It's really, really strong. I think he's a wonderful character, John Levine. I'm a newer Doctor Who fan. I didn't really know anything about him. I just knew he was still alive, and he was Benson. That's kind of all I knew, really.
Yeah.
But obviously, he's very, he's quite an eccentric character, as you were saying earlier. I remember, before I forget to mention, obviously in the Nicholas Courtney documentary, he was wearing that extremely colourful, like, pattern suit. Yeah. You all know what I'm talking about because it was so like striking and obvious. I just think that was very funny to see. And it was filmed a few years later than this one. This was
2021.
Filmed in 2021, because he mentions he was nearly 80, and I thought that can't be right.
And then he says, I'm sure the producers were very happy when he said, it's 2021 in the middle of the documentary. But so it was quite interesting that this was filmed 4 years ago. But it was really insightful. Obviously, it goes into his, really not very good childhood.
how he had lots of diseases as a child, and his dad was, obviously very abusive and not very nice to him. But then it goes into all of this, how he how he became like a surfboard salesman or something in Jersey, which is, and then he became like a clothes salesman, and he was like walking into all of these shops and sort of saying, hire me. And it was a really interesting sort of journey, and then obviously becoming an extra, then a stuntman with Havoc, and obviously he ended up meeting Douglas Camfield, who got in the role in Doctor Who. It's just a really interesting journey. I thought, I'm sure you probably knew this, but he obviously turned down a role in the Five Doctors, which I was quite surprised about, because I mean, obviously, like he said, it was only like one line or something, and he was a guard at the gate, which I understand why he turned down. I still think it would have been great to see him, even for just a line, because you'd be watching it and you point at the screen and go, "Oh, look, it's Benson." But yeah, it's understandable why he didn't take the role. Really. But like he said, the story didn't miss him. It was very, very full of characters. It is a shame he didn't really come back to Doctor Who after, when was his last appearance?
Android Invasion, I think.
Android Invasion, yeah. No, I mean, he obviously mentioned that in the documentary, I think, because it was sort of his last appearance, and that was it. And obviously, the Brigadier wasn't in that one. It was Benson. That was kind of, he was the main unit guy in that story, which is quite nice to see. But I think the highlight of it, obviously, he got very emotional when he was talking about John Pertwee's death in 1996, because he was essentially a father figure to him. And they were, very, very close. He talked about how he like babysat Sean, which I thought was a fun little anecdote, and how close him, John, Nicholas, and Katie were. They were sort of group. They'd have lunch together. It was nice, and he was obviously getting very emotional talking about his death. 20 years later. But yeah, I think he's one of the most. It's not like he's a forgotten character in Doctor Who's history, because obviously he's still with us. But it's just great to see another one of these In Conversation documentaries, because he's not the most major character, really. He's not got a whole lot of screen time when you actually watch it. I mean, what story does he have the most screen time in? Like the Time Monster, probably.
Probably the most lines, at least. I mean, he's probably in Inferno quite a bit, even if he's not always himself. But
yeah. He it's kind of, you barely even notice that he's there in Ambassadors in Inferno, because he's not really, there's not really a unit family. He's just a unit guy. Like, he could be anyone, but he becomes more of, obviously Mike Yates is introduced, and then there's sort of the unit family, starting with season 8. And I think the kind of, he's in the Demons quite a bit, isn't he? Him and Mike Yates are kind of like a double act, and he's great in that one. But I think it's one of the best In Conversation documentaries we've had, which is quite interesting, because obviously he's not a doctor. He's not really a companion either.
No.
He's but yeah, I think he was obviously the obvious choice for an In Conversation documentary for this box set. But I think it was brilliant, and obviously it was nice to see him in the Nicholas Courtney documentary as well. But yeah, it's one of the best for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I agree with you. And Bill, any last thoughts to add on that one?
Just that it was a really I feel like it was a really emotionally charged interview. I feel like, as you've all been saying, like his troubled upbringing and how he was just so thankful that he got Doctor Who, and the family that he basically always wanted was right there, with John Pertwee, Nicholas Courtney, all of them lot, and just how thankful he was that he got to be a part of that, how thankful he was that Douglas Camfield took a chance on him and with casting him as Benton, and just how, even all these years later, meeting fans and everything, just how thankful and grateful he is that, the kind of, to be still kind of remembered, I think, for that, and to still kind of reminisce about those happy times for him. And yeah, I just, I feel like that's kind of, because obviously a lot of the other special features for this release have not really kind of dealt with that emotional side, apart from maybe the Malcolm Hulk bit, where there's kind of that instance of as you were saying earlier, he wanted to it was a bit kind of sad about not writing for the show again, and also kind of, I think there was also that case of you know, feeling like all his work was going to be for nothing. He wasn't going to be remembered. And, you know, I feel like it's just, but it's really great, I think, to have those kind of moments, even though if sometimes if it's very strange, I think, in these interviews, because you're essentially interviewing someone about their entire life and you kind of spilling all the beans basically about their private stuff and everything.
Yeah.
And we got to find out so much more about John Levine as a person. And, you know, it feels strange in a way because, like, obviously we've not met him as a person, and yet we are having this kind of almost intimate conversation with him about who he became, and kind of why he is really grateful, especially that he got to be part of Doctor Who, and sees that as kind of like, I think, his kind of golden era, basically, like the golden age of his life was his Doctor Who years, particularly the Pertwee era, and then how he kind of, you know, felt really sad when that kind of all drifted away. And, you know, the fact that, like, he said that him and Nicholas Courtney went to the bathroom one day and were crying in tears during the making of, I think it was Terror of the Zygons, because the kind of unit family chemistry was sadly no longer there. And it was just kind of like, I think, you know, they kind of felt like they were spare parts, I think, by that point. Like the Brigadier and Benton didn't have much of a role in the Fourth Doctor's era, which, you know, I think is a shame. But then we had such good days with the Third Doctor's era with them, and it's always, I think, quite sad when those kind of things just disappear and they have to end and everything. But then it's understandable, I think, because especially knowing now how much John Pertwee meant to John Levine, now he's basically second father figure to him. I think it's only natural that whoever would have come after Pertwee, there wouldn't have been that same kind of connection with, even if it had been someone who was more interested in the unit side of things. It just wouldn't have been the same, I think, for him.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. Absolutely. Absolutely. It was a great conversation and great to learn more about him and his life. So before we come to the final proper main documentary I want to talk about, we should very quickly touch on the Doctor Escape Room, which I know only me and Bill have seen, and we've not generally been massive fans of in the past. This is the third one after the first Doctor one, the Celestial Toymaker, and the fourth Doctor one, was it on season 15, I think? Maybe? Or I can't remember. Or no, maybe it was on another box set. I can't remember. There's been another one. Bill, did you enjoy this escape room, or did you want to escape it?
Well, I want to escape the escape room just in general, because I'm already sick and tired of seeing the same room like 3 times in a row. I mean, I know there's been like spaces in between each release, but even so, it's just the same old puzzles, just seeing them again and again.
Like a fundamental flaw of the whole idea is that they have to do that. Every single one is them doing the same puzzle, and there's like 7 of them.
And it just feels like every single time, like I feel like this is the same issue that crops up with every single episode.
Yeah.
They should have picked something that the actors themselves actually know about. Like, obviously, we as fans can sit there shouting at our screens, going, "No, put that in Tom Baker's position."
Don't put the Merker with the first Doctor.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
But obviously, they're not going to know that, because why would they?
Exactly.
I mean, I think it was certainly more enjoyable than the first Doctor one, because the first Doctor one was literally Peter Purves and Maureen O'Brien, bless them, nearly having nervous breakdowns, I think, because it was I did not like that at all. This one, I felt at least they were all kind of trying to, I think, keep themselves going through it and kind of keeping good spirits, I think. There was still kind of moments that, like, I think Katie Manning and Daisy Ashford came close to just kind of like, do you know what? You know,
I
screw
can't
this.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that Katie just kept wanting to smash things up, because I would have had the exact same reaction to all of that. Just like, can we just smash it up and see what happens? And then, can that be the answer to everything, please? It's just, I don't necessarily disagree with the idea of a Doctor Who escape room feature at all. Like, I think that's good, and I think it's good to do one for each classic Doctor. But I think fundamentally, just doing the same one every single time is just a pain. And why would anybody want to watch them all back to back? I do not know. Like, you'd have to be completely crazy to ever do that.
There'll be somebody out there, surely somebody, once all 7 are released, let's binge the Doctor Escape Rooms and watch all 7. Because they're like an hour and 15 minutes long as well. They're not short documentaries. So, I tend to be in the same camp as you. I think it's probably the better of the 3 I think there's been so far. I realised it was season 25 was when the last one was out with Sylvester McCoy and Sophie Aldred. So I feel like they're progressively getting better each time. But also, it's getting more and more frustrating watching it, and the tasks that are just the same stupid, like getting the lights in the right place task that's really, really dumb. And expecting them to be able to work out the order of all the companions. They have to get this book out because they clearly don't know it, and it's frustrating. So it's one of those features I watch because I feel like I should, and because it's new content, not because I necessarily think I'm going to particularly enjoy it. And I did watch it at 1.5 times speed, so it only took me like 45 minutes maybe, and I think that might be the best way to watch this feature, would be my recommendation. But the final feature, of course, to talk about is it kind of feels like the main feature. I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. Of this documentary, of this box set, which is the Nicholas Courtney tribute documentary. It's like an hour and a half plus long. It's a very long documentary covering in depth Nicholas Courtney's life. Frankly, his family's life, is like father and grandfather. We start like 100 years before he's born, discussing his lifeline, which was quite interesting. So Ryan, what did you think of this documentary? On the whole, it's pretty in depth. We cover a lot of different things in different parts of his life. What did you think of it?
It was very in depth and just gives a more broader sense of just the kind of person Nicholas Courtney was, and just how just what very fascinating life his family led. I mean, his father was I believe his father was like a major in World War One. I believe, and then that sort of gave a picture for Nicholas as to how the Brigadier should be. But he was almost like as if he was playing his dad in some sense. The fact that his father was a major in the army, I feel like that was a nice connection there between him and how he would portray the Brigadier, and just and I think his father joined MI6, I believe. I think it was in 1918. So again, another connection to the Brigadier there. And it was just hearing how he had a bit of a difficult childhood as well, despite the fact that he had a very well established father and grandfather. He had a very tumultuous childhood as well. The fact that his mother left him at a young age and grew up without a mother around, and that kind of traumatized him. That he went to schools abroad. I believe he was in Kenya, I believe, when he went to school. He kind of faced abuse, especially from he said he had like a benevolent headmaster and wife who they said took pleasures dealing out meetings to the students. It was kind of a very difficult journey that he had, and how he wanted to have a better education, and that he joined the national service when he returned to England, and how he became a private, which again, I think all this, hearing a bit more about how his father and how he joined the Royal Service, national service, it gives you the sense of how all of this greatly influenced his decisions to be in Doctor Who and to play the Brigadier, even though he wasn't the first choice to be the Brigadier. I believe it was meant to be a different actor that was meant to play him in The Web of Fear, but then that actor dropped out, and so he stepped in. So it was definitely interesting to hear that, and also hearing about how he first met how he loved theatre, how he loved being involved in the theatre, how he wanted to be a stage actor. And I believe we see like these little recreations of him when he was like a student.
They were a bit odd, I thought.
Being mentored by this very eccentric tutor. I believe his name was Donald Wolfe, I believe it was. And then these are sort of recreations of, I believe it was a script that he was developing about his experience of being mentored by this very eccentric man. And it's very interesting to see how they pulled some of these recreations off. That was definitely one of the most unique parts of the documentary. Definitely got to say. And how they explain about how he met his wife, his first wife, when he was at the theatre, and then his fame really shot up. It started around the time he began a family, and how that ultimately had problems of its own. And then also just hearing about how he suffered through a lot of depression and anxiety, and just seeing the hardships he was dealt with, and how, and I kind of knew this during Terror of the Autons, he missed 2 days filming because he had a very bad episode and had to be called off sick, and yet, despite all this, he still managed to pull through and delivered an incredible performance as an iconic character. I believe they even mention it, how the character we see in his very first story, The Web of Fear, is so different to how he ends up being from the invasion onwards. The fact that we're very suspicious of him, he's untrustworthy, and he kind of buckles a bit when he loses a lot of his men. And in a way, we kind of see how that kind of helped transform him into the brigadier we know and love from the invasion onwards. And it was a shame also to hear about how his unfortunate passing as well, and he suffered 2 strokes, and then the last one was kind of the start of him having like cancer and him passing away in February 2011. And it was interesting because even though we heard about how, Tom Baker, he wasn't that comfortable with having units around his early stories, it was interesting to see how Tom Baker loved Nicholas Courtney, that they apparently enjoyed each other's company very much. And I think they said there were going to be talks of them doing Big Finish audio dramas together. And he was going to be in more Sarah Jane Adventures. He was going to be with David Tennant, but unfortunately, that all tragically got cut short because of what what happened to him. And so it was really tragic to hear. And I think John Culshaw, who obviously I've seen him pop up in a lot of Doctor Who stuff before, obviously his work on Dead Ringers, and now he's an official part of Big Finish audio dramas as well. I felt like he did such an amazing job of getting across Courtney's family history and just going into detail. And it was just, I felt like he did such a brilliant job of bringing a lot of this really dense history, very dense, rich family history, and yet delivering it in a very presentable way that I found to be very fascinating. I'm just hoping that they somehow managed to get him to present some more documentaries in the future.
Yeah, I agree with all the impressions and things.
He's because, and even though he's wonderful at doing impressions, he's a legend at that. I think he's also, you can tell he really loves Doctor Who as well. He really loves the people behind it, and I just hope that he gets to do more of these in the future. So I feel like for me this is probably the highlight of the box set, because it gives such a surprisingly rich and dense exploration into Courtney's family history and sense of who Nicholas was as a person.
Yeah, exactly. No, I fully agree with you. I think it's definitely one of the highlights. As I say, I think some of the stuff's a bit odd, like the recreation stuff. I'm not sure how well that kind of works in there, and I feel like maybe the documentary as a whole is a little bit too long. It's probably would be my main criticism of it. It just feels like maybe we could have covered some of it a bit quicker or something like that. But I think we learned a lot about Nicholas Courtney as a person. Not that he's someone we didn't know loads about, but I think that was still quite interesting. And Ryan, as you picked out there, the comments from Tom Baker about, you know, how much he loved Nicholas Courtney. And it's quite interesting because that interview they did include was from around, I think, 2010, 2011, something like that, which is very much when Tom was in his, let's say, more opinionated phase than his sort of more mellow phase that we see of you know, features filmed with him in, say, the last 5 years. So to sort of hear that actually then he was really, you know, really liked him and really positive about him was really interesting, especially as we heard that they didn't get on when they did Terror of the Zygons, and, you know, that they weren't really interacting at all. That was, I thought that was a really fascinating insight there. But Charlie, you mentioned that you enjoyed it, but it wasn't quite your favourite feature of the box set. What did you take away from it?
I mean, it was a brilliant document. It was a brilliant documentary. I feel like for me, the In Conversation with John Levine is the absolute highlight of this. I think it's definitely the best of the sort of main 5 features we've covered that I've watched. Obviously, there's Behind the Sofa too, but that's kind of just,
we know what that's going to be.
it's the same thing every time, as entertaining as it is. But I just love the scale of this documentary. It's enormous. Like you said, it's an hour and a half. It just covers so much. It starts in I think 1,000 years ago or something ridiculous. It's like the history of the Courtneys and stuff, and it's it goes into just enormous detail about like his extended family and how, I think, was it like his great grandfather was like in the American Civil War.
Yeah, it was something like that. Yeah.
His uncle was like a professional rugby player, and it's just it goes into all of this. And his dad was in MI5, which is pretty. I mean, it's a neat, obviously, link to the Brigadier, who is like the Brigadier of a spy organization. Basically, it's pretty neat how that came about. But it's a great documentary, just how in detail it goes. We've got John Levine in there, Fraser Hines, Nicholas Courtney himself from was like 2010, 11. We've got Tom Baker. You know, we've got Nicholas Courtney's children, his niece. We've got, you know, it's just lots of people, and it's just a very well put together documentary. I think the recreations with the actors, I was kind of confused what was going on at first, because it just sort of said Donald Wolfett, and I was like, well, he's not alive, is he? Like, what's going on? And it's obviously not really old footage, and I was very confused, and I sort of got the gist when Nicholas Courtney appeared. Very strange part of I mean, it's only like 2 minutes long, but I didn't really know what was going on or what was really happening. I don't really think it was necessary. It was great when they were talking about his time on Doctor Who. Like they said, a real shame when they were talking about the production of Terror of the Zygons, because it was kind of like there were 2 camps, and it was kind of you know, we had Tom Baker, Elizabeth Sladen in sort of one side of the room, and we just had Nicholas Courtney and John Levine in the other. It's a real shame that the production of that was so troubled, but it's nice to see Tom speaking so fondly of Nicholas Courtney, you know, in his older age, but like you said, Elliot, very sort of opinionated and less calm than he is nowadays. But I like seeing the convention footage of him as well towards the end. It's just really nice to see. You know, we had the clip of him sort of saying, "I'm drinking tomato juice" or something. I only watched this like 2 hours ago, so it's very like fresh in my mind, these ending scenes. But it's just a great documentary all round. I think, you know, very, like you said, it could have been like 20 minutes shorter. It did go into detail like a lot. It's a very long documentary, but I think it's just very well crafted, well put together set of just, you know, like basically, you know, 1,000 years ago, his extended family to obviously I mean, present day. I mean, we had his daughter at the this like event in Oldbourne for the Devil's End, so it obviously goes way up to like 2024, which is quite nice. Obviously, after some of the other features on this box set were filmed, which is quite nice. But definitely, I'd say not the highlight of the box set, but definitely second. You know, really, really good. I will be watching this again if I do a sort of marathon, get onto this box set. It's pretty great.
No, I definitely agree with you on that. Yeah, it just seems like Nicholas Courtney was just a genuinely nice person, really, and cared about the fans a lot and wanted to really, be at those conventions and just really appreciated all of that, which I think was really nice to see that come across. And so, Bill, you have the final word on the box set on this documentary. What did you make of the tribute to Nicholas Courtney?
I thought, yeah, it was very well done. Yeah, the stuff with the recreations and stuff, I wasn't too sure what to think of them. I feel like I think what it is ultimately is I think each presenter in this box set has their own kind of style, and that was
Yeah.
clearly, I think, kind of more because John Culshaw was presenting it, and because he's also an impressionist himself, voices the Brigadier for Big Finish and everything, and I feel like that was kind of why it was there, and it made sense. But yeah, and also the fact that we explored so much of his family history. I don't know if we needed to explore all of it, but it was still nice to have anyway, I suppose, just some kind of context, because I suppose then it informed us about how then, because there was like, it was mentioned of how Nicholas Courtney then kind of saw himself fit into that kind of long family legacy, and how he himself didn't feel like he truly lived up to all of that. He wasn't quite as important and as successful as like his ancestors have been, but I I think that he was just as successful, if not more successful as them. I think the fact that the Brigadier is such an iconic character, and yet it's kind of, the Brigadier is strange in that he's an iconic character, but he wasn't technically a companion, or he wasn't the Doctor or anything like that, and yet he's still someone who, I think, like Sarah Jane Smith, and he's one of those type of really important, I think, classic series characters that was there for so many years, through so many Doctors, and it's just the fact that he kept on coming back to the show, despite the difficulties he's faced with Terror of the Zygons as filming. He still kept coming back over the years to play the Brigadier again and again, and he was still doing Big Finish, and he was doing various convention appearances right up until a few years before he died. And I think just the fact of how much he loved the fans and how much he knew that the fans loved him as well. I think that was really lovely to see, and just it's a real shame, I think, that he's sadly no longer with us, because I feel like if they had been able to do an in conversation with him, I think that would have been really great, really informative. But I feel like this documentary is the next best thing, and there's some kind of strange creative choices here and there, but I think ultimately, like, it's still very solid documentary. And if it's not, I don't know where I'd rank it overall in terms of the features as a whole for this season, but it would certainly be in the upper tier. I don't know if it'd be the very top, but if it's not at the very top, then at least second favorite or third favorite. It's really very solid documentary, and I think it's up there with like the Graham Williams documentary that was included as I can't remember, season 15, I think it was.
That was the one.
It felt like that kind of like really in-depth, kind of long study, almost not even a documentary, just a study into a person and their life and upbringing and who they were. And it was just absolutely fascinating to hear more about him, even if, as you say, like, he's a character, he's someone that we kind of already knew quite a lot about anyway, but it's still nice to find out even more kind of like tidbits and new stuff that we didn't know beforehand. And I just think it's a really solid documentary overall.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. It feels like the last word on Nicholas Courtney, the sort of final tribute that we'll realistically get, and it's really, really good to have that. And so that's just about all we've got time for on this edition of the podcast. It's been great to look back at season 7, at the stories, at the documentaries, at this box set that I think is a great addition to the range. And I'm sure I'll be coming back to more features on it in the future as well, because it's just a really good season and a really good box set. But yeah, that is just about all we've got time for today. We will be back, if not before, certainly in time for the first episode of the new season. I'm sure we'll do a sort of little preview for season 2 at some point and see if we're a little bit more excited about it by then. And there may be some other episodes coming up before then as well. But for now, from me, from Charlie, from Bill, and from Brian, it is goodbye.